Welcome, everyone, to the Exit Journey podcast, where we talk with CEOs, VCs, and others about the twists and turns of their journey towards a successful exit. I'm Rhonda Geet, host of the podcast and CEO of Straight Talk Marketing. My guest today is Victoria Libin. She is a senior legal executive with a deep understanding of the business needs of both global Fortune 500 companies and startups. Core member of the executive team and trusted board advisor who designs and executes global legal strategies that align with corporate objectives, driving revenue growth, mitigating risk, and reducing expenses. Flexible, creative, team builder, talent developer, influencer, and collaborative change agent who develops and nurtures alliances with customers, service providers, and internal stakeholders at all levels of the organization, and who also builds, scales, and adapts legal functions throughout growth stages. I would like to welcome Victoria to the podcast and also mention, which is not in your bio, that we used to work together. And I am so excited to have you on the podcast today.
Thanks, Rhonda. And you and I went through an exit together. So
We did. We
yeah,
did indeed. Well, why don't we start by you telling me a little about you and what you've been up to recently?
sure. Since we worked together at Atom and before we sold Atom to Viacom, and then we worked together for many years at Viacom as well, I joined Accenture Digital, where I led a global team of very senior lawyers, where we were basically looking at the art of what was possible with emerging technologies that are not so emerging anymore, such as artificial intelligence, um, Internet of Things, smart manufacturing, et cetera. And then I've joined a couple of startups, which both have recently undergone exits. So right now I'm just contemplating what to do next.
You've had so many exits, everything from IPOs, M&As on both sides, transfer of ownership, and you look at it from legal expertise. And I was wondering, what are some trends that you have seen in companies that have had a successful exit?
Look, I've never seen legal be the driver, right? I mean, at the end of the day, whether a company exits through capital markets, an IPO, or whether they're bought, um, it comes down to business fundamentals, right? Which are, do you have product market fit? Have you been able to scale, the company, um, with healthy revenue while maintaining good margins? And I think right now, especially in the last couple of years, those financial fundamentals have come to bear even more. It's no longer growth at all costs. But where legal plays a factor is while it won't kill the deal, it can make the deal go faster and more smoothly. And some of the common denominators or themes are building a company that has a culture of ethics and compliance. And again, I'm not saying that you have to comply with every possible law out there, but at some point, bringing in legal and getting an inventory of, basically a risk heat map of what are the material risks and what are the gaps, and understanding, hey, what is it going to take if we're getting close to an exit to close those gaps? Because when someone's kicking the tires, particularly if it's an M&A situation, you don't want to spook them. And you may recall the exit that we went through when we sold Atom to Viacom. The fact that there were no red flags, bad skeletons in the closet, meant that Viacom got really comfortable with us. They knew they weren't buying a big lawsuit or a big, regulatory action. Um, and that's, I think, something that is always important for entrepreneurs to have in mind. I mean, there's always a tension. No sales, no product, no company. That's the biggest risk. But at some point, particularly if you're in a regulated industry or if you're, you know, dealing with products that use a lot of personal data, there is a point where you just can't ignore it, and you can't just continuously move fast and break things.
I think you hit on a great point because when companies are starting out and they're like, we have this great idea. First step is you need to have a solid business plan. Second step, you need to get product market fit. And then a lot of companies will jump to, okay, let's go to an exit. But there's all these things along the way, having your data in line, having your cap table clean, making sure that everything is in alignment from a legal side. It makes M&As a little smoother. Not that, I've ever heard of an M&A that's been like perfectly smooth and has gone without any hitches or obstacles along the way, but it does make it a little smoother and a little more helpful. So I think you hit on a good point. But I also think that some of the startups, at least the startups that I advise, may not be thinking like on that legal level. They're like, "Oh, I don't have any lawsuits. I'm good. I don't need legal." What are some key points where you're like, yeah, you need to bring us in? Like for a first-time founder that may not have that expertise and that insight.
So I would say, especially even at a seed level, right? Like you've got this idea, you've sensed that there's a need in the marketplace, you're developing your product, right? And maybe you've done some saves or convertible notes, you haven't even done a price round. It's still really important that you incorporate correctly, that you have agreements with your founders, because founders disputes are actually fairly common, that you have clean title to the intellectual property, because a lot of the due diligence, right, is going to start even before an exit. The moment you do that price round, that series A, um, or anytime you bring in an institutional investor such as typical VC firm or angels, and you price, they're going to want to see that, right? There's going to be tax consequences. Did you do your 83B elections to avoid unnecessary taxes down the line on the value of your equity? You mentioned cap tables. It's incredible to me that people just lose track of who they've granted equity to. Do you actually have an equity plan for stock option grants? To make sure that you're not in violation of RISA. Those are things that yes, can they be fixed? Sure, but they're costly, and you don't want to be fixing them when you're in the middle of the pressure of a transaction.
I completely agree with that. What are some other common legal pitfalls or mistakes that founders, business owners should avoid when they're in this planning and executing of their exit strategy?
I mean, I think if you don't have an in-house legal department, bring one in well in advance. A lot of founders think they can't afford to have legal, or that legal is a luxury. But look, even if you can't afford a full-time in-house general counsel, there's plenty of, seasoned former general counsels that, now act as fractional GCs, similar to a fractional CFO.
Mm,
And they will help you, set up everything, make sure your cap table's clean, that all of your, previous corporate transactions from, whether it was safes or Series A or whatever it is, that that you're in good standing in the states that you're registered to do business. If you're selling across state, that you've paid all your taxes and all those things. So those are the things that again can delay a transaction, and a delay can time kills all deals
it
at the end
does.
of the day.
I think that's great advice. I do think bringing in fractional executives early on is a great way to ramp up. But as you're gaining traction and as you're preparing for an exit, do you think that there is a benefit to do that transition from a fractional CFO, fractional legal, fractional CMO, fractional whoever you happen to bring in, because you're trying to be very mindful of spend. Do you think there's a time when they should convert their fractional to a full-time person to maybe make them a little more attractive as they're preparing for an exit?
I mean, I think it's a very context-based question. It's going to depend on the startup, the industry, the stage. Yeah, I would say most somewhere between Series B and Series C, you really should consider building an internal in-house department. Start with a single lawyer of one department, but try to hire someone that has scaled and built legal teams, because by the time you get to Series D, it may be that at that point a capital market exit, an IPO, is more likely than selling to another company. And you're going to need the processes in place to be able to do your securities, SEC reporting quarter in, quarter out. You've had to build the corporate governance. I think corporate governance is something that startups often ignore because, you're dealing with a small board. Generally, it's, VCs sitting on your boards with no independence, and it's fairly informal. You meet every quarter for 1 or 2 hours. You go through, any updates from the last quarter in terms of product launches, financials, uh, revenue, and that's about it. But rarely, have I been in a quarterly board meeting in earlier stage startups where the VCs are basically asking for, I mean, if there's a major lawsuit that then, that gets reported, maybe, but they're not necessarily going to be asking about, hey, what is the regulatory risk heat map look like? Do we have any major compliance gaps? Are we potentially in, the crossfire of regulatory agencies? Are we risking reputational damage because of it? And with privacy and cybersecurity laws, I think all companies, and now, especially if you're in the AI space, you better start thinking about what your compliance and your board reporting for compliance is going to look like.
I think you hit on a great point that early stage companies completely overlook when they're pulling together a board. Usually their board is formed from investors, and it's usually the investors that are saying, hey, I want to be on your board. I think we need to get the other investors on here, and the investors drive the board strategy. Where I often tell companies that I advise, the CEO, the founder, needs to take that leadership of creating a board and making sure that there's at least one independent director on the board, because they can be a mediator between all the investors and the CEO, and find a common ground for that direction, and make sure that there is compliance and there is a governance and that they're following standards. Do you find that having an independent board director early on is a better strategy than waiting and trying to stick someone in a little later?
It depends. Again, I hate to give the legal lawyerly answer, but uh, again, it's very situational, right? Whether it's right to do it in a Series A, Series B, I've rarely seen it. Somewhere like generally Series C is when I start seeing some independents come on board. If it's a particular industry where the company benefits from industry expertise, or certain skill sets that independent directors would have, then I would say you might even be wise to have it in the Series A, Series B. But ultimately, right, it comes down to that, to skills. And I do recommend, thinking about even, with investor VCs is, that are on the board, what skills are they bringing to the table and what gaps? If you're, for example, a company where you're going to have, say, manufacturing, right? Having an independent that really understands manufacturing industry and that can open doors can be really important. If you are a company where, say you're in ad tech where personal data is sort of a bit of currency, then having somebody that really understands cybersecurity and the consequences of a data breach of all that personal information that your company may be storing might be really important. So again, the skill matrix, even though it's some concept that you normally see for public companies, I think can be very useful um, when assembling a private company board.
I agree with that. I think that's um, a good answer. And I know everyone hates the answer. It depends. I say it all the time too, and usually say, "Oh, I hate this," but it depends. But in this case, I think it's very accurate. So showing traction is something that everyone talks about companies needing, especially as you're ramping up and you're going through your different fundraising rounds. You've worked on go-to-market strategies with a lens of reducing regulatory and business risk. Can you expand on that a little more?
Sure. I mean, ultimately, it's about getting sales right in the door. And sometimes when you're dealing with go-to-market strategy, you've got to think about who are you selling to? Obviously, I mean, you're in marketing, so you know this. Like, what is your target customer? What based on the problems you're trying to solve. But if you're trying to sell particularly to Fortune 100 companies, right? You're going to be put through a lot more scrutiny. And if you're an unproven product, their procurement team is going to, kick the tires. And, I'll give you an example. When I was at a company where we were selling these robotics arms that were combined with software, the initial go-to-market strategy was that we're going to sell these big pieces of hardware up front and then charge for subscription for the software. So I sort of raised my hand and said, hey, who's going to sign up to, write a 7-figure check for unproven products? We don't quite, we're still in that product market fit. And I'm like, we might actually have to basically lease or do the robots as a service so that the upfront commitment is less and so that it's capex. So that's not purely legal, but it's, you once you're in-house enough and you've been on the other side supporting sales, you start realizing what the friction points are. And I think for early stage startups, removing those friction points is really important. Then you start getting more into the legal sort of risk management side and trying to think about, hey, if I'm an acquirer, what's going to give me heartburn? And often when you're, early on, you feel you don't have a lot of negotiating power. So you accede to, providing like unlimited caps on damages. It might be okay for the first, 5 contracts that you do, but eventually if you keep doing it, whoever's acquiring you is acquiring all of those liabilities too, because they're assuming all of those sales agreements. So at some point you gotta, stand your ground and say, look, we're going to be a long-term partner of yours, providing you with whatever the technology or service. And if we're giving these uncapped um, indemnifications or warranties to everyone, at some point, our insurance is not going to cover it and we're going to be out of business. And you wouldn't do that if, as the vendor on the other side. And you just have to have them understand. You may recall, I'm going to, again, because we worked there together. This is before Viacom acquired us. Nickelodeon wanted to license a whole bunch of our Shockwave games. And I was negotiating with them on the other side. And obviously, this was lucrative. They were going to pay us, licensing, revenue for this. And they were being very onerous in terms of their terms. And, they basically threw like, hey, we're the public company, you're the startup. And I just looked at them. I said, look, clearly the content is valuable and you stand to make revenue or you wouldn't be talking to us. And then they kind of backed up and, became a bit more reasonable. And, we landed someplace fair.
I I think so many people when they're putting together go-to-market strategies, they think it's just a sales or marketing thing. And it is not. It's a full company thing. And whoever's leading that needs to understand that and remember that finance is involved, product is involved, customer service is involved, and legal is involved. And sometimes that isn't as thought out. But, and especially if you are a startup and you're negotiating to get those big logos on your sales deck and your pitch decks, and you're like, oh yay, they're interested in us. Sometimes you feel like you're the little person and you shouldn't, push back. But you make a great point. They wouldn't be talking to you if they weren't going to make some money off.
Yeah, or if you weren't filling a need that, that they really have. So, you bring up, one of the roles that I see legal play in terms of supporting sales sometimes is being that kind of information broker, or that's bringing in and making sure that product is aligned, that the delivery organization, I mean, can we support it? Like, just because you signed up to provide certain support or SLAs, you can put it on paper, but can you actually do it? And that's where engineering sometimes has to come in. Or sometimes sales is, the customer may be pushing for certain customization. Does engineering have the bandwidth? You brought up finance. Sometimes certain structures might be, convenient for the customer, but it can, or certain warranty language, that is being demanded by the customer can really affect revenue recognition. So you need to make sure that finance is also, aligned. And that's where having it, legal can really help work with, the go-to-market organization to have a deal desk, to have sort of general templates and, positions, and then fallbacks and escalations where you might need to escalate to finance or the CEO.
Yeah. And I think finance and legal can come in um, and kind of be that ally for sales and marketing that sometimes we forget we have. When you're negotiating a deal with a customer, an advertiser, partner, whomever it happens to be, legal and finance can be your superheroes to come in and kind of keep everyone in line so that you don't get pushed around as much.
That is correct. I mean, look, again, I try to think of legal, at least when I'm, running or building the teams, as facilitators as opposed to obstacles. Unfortunately, there I know I've worked with some executives, particularly in sales and marketing, that think that, legal is the department of no, or where good ideas go to die. Um, but things have changed a lot. I think most sophisticated in-house counsels see themselves as true partners, collaborators. Look, we all want the same thing. We want the company to succeed. We all know that sales and marketing is what's bringing in revenue, and if revenue doesn't come in the door, there's no company. So in that, we're aligned. And that's another reason why, again, it doesn't pay to be penny wise and dollar foolish. Often when I see legal become the department of no, it's because someone got hired straight out of a law firm. And law firm practice is a little bit different. Hardly ever, do there's practice liability. They have multiple clients, they have to hedge more. If something's not like 100%, by the book, and it's gray, they can't just say, okay, it's gray, but go ahead. So just hire a senior, seasoned lawyer that has been in house for a while, that can better align the company objectives and risk tolerance with the policies that they're creating.
You bring up some really good points that CEO and founders should be aware of in general. What other considerations should they consider when planning an exit?
Timing. I've been involved in exits that looked great. And then, especially when you're dealing with an IPO, you've got to realize that you're going to need 2 years of audited financials. And they're going to want to also see, the auditors are probably also going to get involved with your internal controls for, Sarbanes-Oxley compliance. And putting in those financial controls and SOX controls and the audit may take longer than you think. So start working on that at least a year beforehand. Um, Same thing, if you think your exit is going to be through to a public company, think about what your major regulatory compliance and IP risks are, and start closing those gaps. Clean up your cap table. If you haven't followed your charter, your articles of incorporation, and done transactions that require shareholder approval that you didn't obtain, realize that can be cleaned up. Assuming most companies are generally incorporated in Delaware, but it takes time to get the Delaware sort of certificates refiled and get all of that kind of corporate and legal debt cleaned up. So give yourself time. It doesn't happen overnight.
I think bringing up the timing issue, timing in the M&A world does not always go as planned or as you would like it, as fast as you would like it, as slow as you would like it. But I think you bring up an underlying point, which is when you're planning for an exit, you also have to consider what type of exit you want and what type of organization that, if you're going for an acquisition or a merger, how their culture and their viewpoints align with yours. It's not just putting a sign out saying, hey, we want to be bought, come buy us. It's being very strategic. And
What
I
do you
think,
want from the exit, right?
yes, what do you want? People
What,
to, and not just a bag of money.
what do you want? I mean, in some cases, maybe you just want the bag of money, and you don't want a role or an ongoing role, and you don't care if the acquirer shuts the company down. But most of the time, founders think of their companies as, their child, and they want that product or they want that company to survive. They've also developed deep relationships and feel some level of, almost paternal care towards a lot of the employees, particularly early employees, and they want to make sure those employees are going to have a home. So think about those considerations as well. Um, you know, Also depending on what sale, if you truly, if you found product market fit and revenue, why is somebody going to acquire you? Are they going to acquire you because you're going to be additive to the top line? Are you going to be acquired because you have a technology that they don't want to develop? So it's just really, purchasing the technology, in which case make sure that, your chain of title to the technology is really clean. In other words, you've signed invention assignment agreements with all your employees, with contractors. You've protected the trade secrets. You filed, for IP whether it's patent and copyrights when appropriate. Make sure those ducks are in a row. And in other cases, it might just be an acqui-hire, right? They're hiring the team because there's a skill set or capabilities that they want to build that they don't have. So if they're hiring a team, then that's also where the cultural fit with that acquirer is going to come into place. And what long-term incentives will that acquirer provide? And then, I'm not going to get into the technicalities of that, but, most stock plans are not necessarily assumed by the acquirer. So then, there's other stock incentives or earnouts or other mechanisms for retaining key talent that the acquirer, may have to put into place.
I think that's an excellent point. What legal protections and contingencies can be put in place to safeguard the interest that you're talking about?
I mean, I would actually start if especially there's a couple of very prominent examples right now between, Twitter and, Adobe, where if it wasn't for some large breakup fees and the Twitter situation, Musk was trying to take the company public, right? Was trying to buy it and take it public. And, he was trying to get out of the deal. And uh, lawyers representing, the public Twitter company put in enough of a penalty that it became unpalatable for Elon Musk to get out. With the recent, I believe, was Figma, acquisition that Adobe was trying to do that didn't pan out. Again, there was enough of a breakup fee. So make sure you have breakup fees, because again, just the process of whether engaging bankers, watch out for, generally speaking, when you engage a banker to shop your company around, they're going to have a clause where, if, for a certain amount of time, if you sell, even if they didn't bring the sale, you're going to have to pay them, a fee. So, watch your agreement with the bankers as well, engage the right bankers, engage, the right consultants overall, including, um, auditors. Because again, most acquirers are going to want to see some level of audited financials. It might not be a full PCAOB audit, but they're going to want to know that your finances are, fairly clean and they can rely on them. Hire the right law firm. And actually, let me rephrase that. Hire the right lawyer, because really you're hiring the lawyer, not the law firm. A law firm may have a fantastic brand, but if you end up with somebody who hasn't done as many transactions in your industry or your type, you might be paying for the brand name and not getting the quality of advice. So just make sure you really vet the lawyer. Again, that's where, if you have in-house counsel, they can help you engage all of these professionals and make sure they're, the right fit.
As we wrap up, what are other insights that you feel founders, CEOs who are on either side of an exit, of what they should be aware of?
We've talked a lot about sell side. Let's talk a little bit about the buy side. Say that you're a later stage startup, you've raised some large rounds, you're sitting on some cash, and you want to deploy it. And you want to grow inorganically by maybe doing some market consolidation and buying some companies. Due diligence is going to be key. And it's almost the inverse, right? You've got to make sure, again, why are you buying the target? Do they have a technology that, it's going to save you time because you don't have to build it? Are you buying it because you're buying their top line and, the revenue is going to roll up? Then the question is, what are their margins? Like, how much is it actually, how much of it really is going to kind of help you with your EBITDA numbers, or is it just purely top line? So, really look at the financial due diligence. Look at, hey, what lawsuits are you potentially, bringing on board? What kind of legal compliance that they have? Is their IP clean? If it's an acqui-hire, what is the culture like? Are they truly going to fit in, or are they going to walk out the door? You may recall when we, after Adam got acquired by Viacom, where, we did, a few, smaller acquisitions that were more acqui-hires. And I had concerns about the cultural fit with one of them. And I insisted on having basically like a key man clause, because I felt that if the CEO or the CTO of that small company left, the ability to build that gaming engine would not happen. And as it turns out, it was, the CTO could not work as part of a big company and left within like less than 6 months, which meant that at that point, the subsequent payments, because we only paid a small fraction up front, were not owed. And, the product went nowhere. So that was kind of sort of key foresight at that point. So those cultural fits, especially in acqui-hire situations, or if there's some really key talent that, your acquisition is valueless without them, make sure you're thinking about how you're going to address those and how you're going to structure the payments.
Well, Victoria, thank you so much for joining today on the Exit Journey podcast. I so appreciated our discussion, and I think it gave a lot of insight in that on both seller and buyer side can learn from.
Really appreciate it. And it's been a pleasure, and happy to talk to any of your viewers or continue the conversation on some other topic some other time.
I love that. Well, for all the listeners out there, if you or someone you know would like to be on the podcast to talk about your journey for your company and the path that you've taken towards a successful exit, please contact us. The info is in the description, or you can visit straighttalk.marketing and fill out the form. Until next time, we wish you successful navigation of the potholes and pitfalls in your exit journey. Thank you. Did it stop?